Hey, welcome back. It's TK Tuesday. I'm your host, Reverend Dr. TK Gray, and this is the Prayed Up Network. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit more about PTSD and pose the question, can you inherit PTSD from your parents and your family? The answer is yes, right? So we've talked about it before that PTSD can be developed simply by watching the news. You don't actually have to experience a traumatic event yourself. You could watch it on television. For myself, I think when I was in about sixth grade, I remember being triggered when our history teacher put on a pretty violent video about the wars. And I didn't realize at the time why it had triggered me the way that it did. But when I was thinking about talking to you about this question, everything sort of started to make sense when I really looked at the history of my family. So, first on my mother's side, her father, my grandfather, he was a corporal in the army. He was stationed over in Europe during World War II and shot 17 times with a machine gun. He ended up on the MIA list and the casualty list. My grandmother ran off with someone else. And when he came home, he went to find her. It's an epic love story. I remember feeling so just enamored by it, wanting to have that relationship, to have somebody who would literally look for me if I went away, right? That idealistic. But really, the truth of it is, he did come home. He did find her. She separated from the second husband, who wasn't actually married to. The child stayed with them. And my grandfather proceeded to have a whole family with my grandmother, my mother being the youngest of all of their kids. But my grandfather was shot 17 times with a machine gun. He was never the same. Now, while by the time I was born, he had stopped drinking, I heard the stories and the legends of how abusive he was. And my mother was the first person in our family to graduate from high school and get a driver's license. Craziness, right? She was only born in 1956, but she was the matriarch of the family. She took care of my grandparents. She did everything for them, for us. She worked two, sometimes three jobs. I mean, it was insane. Really, now when I think about how much none of us realized how bad the PTSD was. And if trauma math tells us anything, right? It's this plus this plus this. So when you're talking about generational trauma and inheriting PTSD, that's some serious math. It's really hard to separate yourself from fact and fiction and really look at what's yours innately and what you've learned from your family members. Same deal on my dad's side of the family. He comes from a long line of service veterans. He was in Vietnam, and while he split up from my mom when I was young, again, I heard the stories. And when I met him as an adult at 21, he told me the truth. His PTSD was so bad. He would just anesthetize himself. He would drink. He would he'd pass out or he'd freak out, right? And even going up through my life, my mother choosing boyfriends that were violent, remember so many things. And while there's no disclosure, your personal experience is so important. And that's why I'm sharing mine with you today. Fortunately for me, I've had the opportunity to break through that cycle of generational trauma. It stops with me, and my daughter will not have it. She's been using simple techniques to take down her adrenaline and cortisol since she was born, right? Of course, I did it for her until she's about 3.5 years old, and she started doing it for herself. It's something so simple that now when she comes to me and she feels frustrated, she feels stressed, All I have to do is say, "Hey, did you use your techniques?" And then let's talk about it. Changes everything. So, while there is never right or wrong when we're talking about PTSD, I firmly believe each member of my family and each human being will do the best that they can with what they know. But what you don't know, you can't fix. So if this resonates with you, or if you have any questions, go ahead, post them up. Let us know. We appreciate you stopping by here at the Prayed Up Network. And I wanted to just say a huge thanks to our sponsors, Joe Lombardi at Ironhawk Financial, and we love our sponsors at CashMap. Thank you so much. Have a blessed week. We'll see you next Tuesday.